Mark Rogers TV with you. It's time to talk some Auburn football with Gus Malzahn's third edition, ready to hit the spring practice field in just a couple days. We bring in Jamie Hancock of Preps Nation to prep us on the Auburn Tigers. Jamie, let's start with the offensive line because I look at the strengths and weaknesses of this team and I gravitate to this offensive line right off the bat. 119 games started, lost from last year's edition with, of course, Reese Dismukes. We just saw him give his best at the NFL Combine. So talk about what we could possibly see with the offensive line.
When you talk about Auburn's offensive line, Reese Dismukes has been a 4-year starter for Auburn, and he's a guy that for years you've been able to know that he was going to anchor the offensive line and very possibly the best center in the nation for the last couple of years. Did win the Remington Award this past season as a senior. So you lose about 50 starts and a lot of leadership with that young man. The other guy that comprises most of those starts lost will be Chad Slade, and he's a guy that is somewhat drawing the ire of the Auburn fans over the last couple of years because they thought maybe he wasn't quite good enough for things of this nature. However, Chad was a 2-star guy coming out of Moody High School there, and he came in and he started for about 3 years for Auburn and did a very good job. People were down on him because he wasn't overly aggressive. Well, he was a little more athletic. He was a good high school basketball player. He was a guy that did a good job for Auburn over his 4 years, and people should be, proud of what he accomplished. So that's most of the starts in those the losses that you talked about. Patrick Miller is a guy that left early, very big surprise that he left early. Would be the third person in that group that you would look at as a loss. Coming in, you see Sean Coleman is going to anchor the offensive line at left tackle again this year, the young man who had the battle with leukemia coming out of Mississippi, and he's about a 21-year-old junior player. He's already graduated before last season. He's a great story and a really talented player. Avery Young is another guy coming back that Auburn's very comfortable with. He's an NFL caliber guard on the right side, and he's somebody Auburn's very comfortable with. You throw in the fact that Kyle Cozon, who was the freshman starter for the team that went to the national championship game, started every game for the national championship team that Auburn, the runner-up that Auburn put on the field a couple years ago. Also, Austin Golston, who has transferred from Ole Miss. He was an Alabama high school product, signed with Ole Miss out of high school. I believe he started nearly every game for the Ole Miss Rebels as a freshman at right tackle. He is coming in as well and will be eligible this time. And so they're picking up some starts. They're going to pick up some players that have had SEC starts and have been very good as freshmen, and it may make it interesting for the offensive line.
All right, Jamie, I'm going to hit you with what I consider question mark number 2. The defense for this football program has been trailing the offense seemingly forever. I don't know when the last time the Tigers had a better defense than better offense. Now you bring in one of the elite defensive coordinators in the country in Will Muschamp. Your expectations of what he will bring to this defensive mindset, schematically, overall, that we could see a difference in this defense this fall?
I think for me the biggest thing that Will Muschamp brings is passion. And that's not to say that the defensive staff prior wasn't passionate about what they do. They were a staff that obviously work hard. Every staff does. These coaches put in hours that are just unbelievable. But what Will Muschamp does is he wears his emotions on his sleeve. Everyone knows exactly what Will Muschamp is thinking at that very moment. And for a defensive standpoint, players usually react to that because they have that feel, they have that understanding that emotion. Defense is something that is somewhat emotionally driven, and Will Muschamp brings that passion and that fire that maybe Auburn has somewhat missed over the last couple years. Then you look into the fact that they've had some deficiencies at some positions that have caused them trouble. Defensive end and defensive tackle in the pass rush was a deficiency last year to go along with a possible coverage deficiency. Those two things did not work well together. Schematically, I think Muschamp will bring several things in that will help, but I think passion and drive may be something, and expectations. When you raise expectations on these young men, they typically respond in the offseason and during the season when they look at it, the fact that they believe that Muschamp is one of the best defensive minds in the nation, and he is expecting them to react as such. And so I think a lot of times when you raise the bar for players, they do respond well.
The domino effect I'm going to get to. You've got the South's oldest rivalry in Auburn, Georgia. Georgia had some secondary defections. A couple went to Louisville when Todd Grantham left to take over the defense for the Cardinals. One, Trey Matthews, we're going to see suit up for the Auburn Tigers. Could be a major factor. We would expect him to possibly be a starter at safety.
Absolutely. Trey Matthews is a guy that Auburn desperately wanted when he came out of the Noonan area in Georgia out of high school, and he's somebody that Auburn had a really good shot at. They ended up not getting him, and he started as a freshman for the Georgia Bulldogs and did a pretty good job. Most Georgia fans will remember him now that he's transferred for the Hail Mary or in Jordan-Hare, the prayer in Jordan-Hare, as they say it. And Josh Harvey Clemens and Trey Matthews were very prominent in that play. Like you said, Harvey Clemens has now transferred to Louisville, and Trey Matthews, who was a part of one of Auburn's favorite plays of all time, now will hopefully become one of the favorite players because he comes into a position of need. Whitehead is now gone. We missed him half the season last year for some off-the-field issues between him and a coach. And so you feel like he's probably going to step into that safety position vacated by Whitehead and hopefully bring a little more of a physical presence in the back end, which is something Auburn has not had since Darren Bates moved to linebacker, and before him, probably Junior Rose Green. And Auburn has not been very physical at the safety position over that time frame. Rudy Ford should be the other safety. He's not a very physical guy, but he's very fast. The cornerback position, Jonathan Jones, will lock up one side, very good in coverage, was second or third in the SEC in interceptions last year. That other cornerback position is as open as you can possibly imagine for anybody to take, as both guys that frequented that position last year have now graduated. So it's one of those things to where in the secondary, talent should be coming up, experience not so much, but the secondary guys are going to really lean heavily on the defensive front maybe for some help this year.
Jamie Hancock joins us from Preps Nation. Jamie, I'm going to hit you up with some star players, or in the first case, a would-be star player that Auburn fans definitely hope turns out to be a star in the making. Jeremy Johnson, we saw him in one game started last year against an Arkansas defense we didn't know at the time, but turned out to be one of the better defenses in the conference, and he lit them up for like 245 in the air, 45 points. Arkansas basically gave up no points to anybody else. So I'll start with Jeremy Johnson at quarterback, and what do you expect to see out of him?
I expect a guy that comes in with great confidence. He was a very confident young man in high school. I got a chance to watch him, and between his junior and senior year, he made a big jump. And he's a guy that doesn't really put his emotions out there. He's pretty quiet. He's not that big-time vocal guy that you see a lot of times, but he is that silent leader. He is a very confident guy. He commands the huddle with respect by how he carries himself. And so he's a young man. He's built like Cam Newton, but he does not play the game the same way. He's a bit more of a pocket passer, although he runs well in a straight line. Changing directions is not his thing, so you're not going to see a Nick Marshall read zone-based offense. You're going to see a little bit more of a conventional style spread, much like maybe that you see with a J.T. Barrett, in a sense that even though Barrett runs well, he's a guy that stands in the pocket, throws the ball, pretty well, or even Jones for Ohio State when he came in. Johnson is going to be that guy. He needs those weapons around him. He can pull the ball down and run it, but it's more along the lines of getting you 5 or 6 yards and getting to the next play rather than looking at a 2nd and 14 because the quarterback couldn't elude the pass rush. He can do that, but he's not going to be an option-style quarterback, and he's not going to be successful in that look consistently. He is a really good pocket passer.
Jamie, you mentioned weapons. Weapon number one would be Duke Williams. The first time I got a chance to see him, and I knew very little about him, had seen the name, knew that there were a lot of accolades, a lot of hype, a lot of attention, was in the spring game last year, and I thought he just jumped off the screen. in me watching the spring game. I just thought he was exceptional and expected a lot out of him. He had a very nice season, complimenting Sammy Coates, and Coates missing much of the early part of the season. Duke Williams became the target. What makes Duke Williams what we could really see as possibly emerging as the best pass combination in the SEC with Jeremy Johnson and Duke Williams?
Duke Williams is a guy that's not going to wow you with physical numbers in, say, a combine style setting. What he does do is he does everything that you want to teach a wide receiver to be able to do. The problem is you can't teach it. You can't teach the intangibles that he puts into play. He's like watching the best rebounding power forward in the NBA do his job, and you can't understand why he gets his job done and why people can't box him out and things of that nature. He's that guy. He's got a great catch radius. He has big hands. You put the ball anywhere near him, he's going to catch it. Corners can't cover him because he's too big and too physical. Safeties and linebackers have trouble covering him simply because their cover skills just don't suit that out in space. So he is so much the focus of Auburn's offense, where last year Auburn was so dependent on him in the passing game. The games that he missed, especially the Georgia game, the offense went in the can because it was cover Sammy Coates, and you didn't have to worry about anything else. It was stop Coates, stop Artis Payne, ball game's over. With Williams, it opens up everything for their offense, and I expect that again this year. He's just going to have that second person to come and play with him and be his Robin to him being Batman, because Sammy Coates is gone. Quan Bray is another young man that's gone. They've got some guys that look very similar to those two players at those positions. It's time for Tony Stevens to step up. Kid out of Florida, 6'4", 200 pounds, great inline speed like Sammy Coates. He's got to make plays. The other guy is Marcus Davis, another Florida kid, looks a lot like Quan Bray. He's somebody that has to step up and do his thing in the slot and give the quarterback three options. The tight end position may be the biggest unknown at Auburn University right now because, honestly, I can't tell you who is going to line up at tight end. I can't even tell you a person on the roster that's a tight end. After the loss of Uzama and Brandon Fultz and the unfortunate passing of Jaquil Mitchell over that same time frame, there's not really a tight end to speak of on the roster that you can look at and say, we know this guy has a shot.
I like the Batman-Robin analogy as long as we're talking about the classic Adam West and Burt Ward Batman and Robin. James.
Not Chris O'Donnell. You won't bap and zonk.
Very good, very good. I have that argument with my 18-year-old who loves The Dark Knight, but hey, I've got to go back to the 60s with the original guy. All right. One last thing I'm going to hit you with, Jamie. We're doing a series, as we typically do in the off-season here at MarkRogersTV, looking at the top 10 nationally, looking at the top 5 in the SEC at each position. I've made my way through the offense. I'm hitting the defense. And as you know, as much as anybody else around, defensive line in the SEC is typically loaded. And it's loaded again, despite all the guys that left for the NFL draft. I'm looking at like 13 guys, and two guys I'm looking at would love your take on Carl Lawson, even though he missed all the time last season and really wasn't an impact until late in the championship run to the SEC. But, boy, did he really compliment Dee Ford late in that campaign as a true freshman. And Montravius Adams as well. Would love to hear your take on those two guys.
Lawson is a kid that came in with a lot of hype, and he lived up to that for the most part. As you said, he really took hold of the position in the second half of the season for the team that made the run to play Florida State in the Rose Bowl, and he's a guy that they were depending on heavily coming into last year, and they knew that. It was something that we knew the pass rush was going to be an issue if they could block Lawson. Well, his knee blocked Lawson for the entire year and kept him out, and that was a big thing. Carl Lawson is about 260 pounds. He's got the body. He's got the physicality. He's a guy that can play the run fairly well, but can get after the passer, and he is a team leader from the standpoint as he's a young man that's very intelligent. He is a very cerebral young man, so he's somebody that doesn't just bring physical attributes. He is also a thinking man's man on and off the field. So he's somebody that can very well crack that top 5 type position at the defensive end spot in the SEC. The other guy that you mentioned is Montravius Adams. Came out of a very small school in Georgia, and it was one of those things you just didn't know how much he was going to contribute early because you didn't know what you were dealing with. What we got was a 6'4", 300-pound guy that was ultra quick and somewhat raw. And as a freshman, he somewhat stood out and was unblockable at times. His sophomore year, they were able to focus on him a little more with Lawson out. They could handle the ends one-on-one and spend a little more time trying to block Gabe Wright and or Adams at the defensive tackle or the 3 technique, and really were able to dedicate more than one blocker to what was probably the 2 best pass rushers at defensive tackle. So that was something that Adams, on the stat sheet and on film, Auburn fans were a little disappointed in his sophomore season, but I would tell you it is because he didn't have anybody to his outside that could help draw the attention away from him. It's hard as a defensive tackle to push the pocket if you've got a guard and a center that are dedicated to you, or a guard and a tackle. And so I think both of those guys have the ability to make your list as the top 5 in the SEC. Adams is probably one of the most gifted defensive tackles that I've ever seen. He's just got to put it all together and get a little bit of help around him.
Auburn opens spring practice on March 10th. The spring game is on April 18th, and though it's like 5 months, 6 months before we're going to see some real football, we get a taste of it with most of us starving for some football this time of year. Jamie Hancock joins us from Preps Nation to talk college football, focus a little bit on the SEC, but mostly the beloved Auburn Tigers. So, Jamie, we appreciate the time as always, sir.
Always a pleasure, Mark.